Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. The Max Verstappen drama continues. George Russell revealing that after the Austin Grand Prix, all 20 drivers met with the FIA Stewards to determine the changes they might look to make to the driving standards regulations going forwards. 19 of 20 drivers, according to Russell, agreed with the recommendations. One driver did not. Who might that potentially be? Can we guess based on the evidence we saw on track in Mexico? Loads of other drama on the day as well. Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. First of all, on the driver market, there are some questions on where Franco Colapinto is going to go, if anywhere. Some of the guesses have been Perez gone, Lawson in, Colapinto to RB alongside Yuki Tsunoda. That is a theory, although Colapinto actually said over the weekend it looks pretty slim. So not exactly sure what's happening there. I think the problem is, and even Red Bull mentioned this, and it's maybe the same thing with, you guys remember when they were trying to replace Sargent and Williams needed a driver, they wanted Lawson, but Red Bull said, you're not having Lawson, we might need him. And the problem is that Red Bull, they're like, well, if we sign Colapinto and he's still a Williams driver and he's coming on loan, then why would we effectively help them out, right? Training up their driver under their specifications. So I think the only way, to me, that Red Bull sign Colapinto is if there's some sort of relationship whereby, you know, they can potentially sign him for Williams in the future for a discount. I don't know, because I don't think Red Bull want to effectively train up a driver that Williams can then put in their car over the next couple of years. If Red Bull have a driver in their program, they want it to be their driver. And I'm not sure Williams will like that. They'll probably prefer to keep Colapinto in their own organisations. That's kind of why I think it's a little bit slim, the likelihood that he goes elsewhere. But of course, they will need somebody, you would think, because surely Perez can't survive for too much longer. There's obviously been Horner's comments over the last few days that have certainly implied Perez ain't long for this world in a Formula 1 seat, and there have been rumours that he's even going to get kicked out after Brazil for the triple header, Las Vegas, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, which would be surprising, maybe, especially 3 rounds from the end, but you know, hypothetically, it would give them a chance to put Lawson or Yuki in the car for a couple of rounds, I don't know, and then see how they get on, possibly. But of course, there's yet no real confirmations arriving on this. One confirmation, though, we did have today was the fine paid by the accepted breach agreements from 2 of our engine manufacturers in the sport. So Honda and Alpine, now this was like announced a while ago, so this is not brand new information, but Honda and Alpine, they effectively made a mistake when it comes to the cost cap. Not necessarily they overspent, but they breached the regulations because they didn't fill in a form right. It was a procedural breach, I believe, for both parties. So they are both liable to pay a pretty substantial fine. That's a good few steak dinners, it seems, for the FIA stewards that have come up with this one. They, of course, have added the total up to $1 million. Not exactly sure what Honda did worse than Alpine to have a 600k fine, and Alpine only 400k, but seems like they've agreed to it, and that's what they're going to pay. One big update on this weekend as well is the Brazilian Grand Prix has been resurfaced, and this is very fascinating. It also may rain this weekend, and we'll discuss that towards the end of the video, but the track has been resurfaced, and that's what Pirelli say. The work was only recently completed and the asphalt was then thoroughly cleaned using a high-pressure water washing system that removes the sheen that usually appears on brand new bitumen, and this has also increased the abrasiveness of the circuit. Now, it's typically a one-stop in Brazil, at least it can be, and Pirelli are bringing the softest range of compounds, well, certainly a softer range of compounds. So, softer range of compounds, sprint weekends, potential rain. Pirelli say the track surface will be a complete unknown factor for drivers and teams. That sounds like chaos to me, certainly with one practice session, so it's all to play for this weekend. Couple of things to say on the drivers going into next year, because there's been a few interesting narratives, and I just wanted to dive into it today in a little bit more detail, because whenever Sainz has a great weekend, and he does on occasion, there's all sorts of videos going out about, oh, well, you know, Ferrari will regret dropping Sainz. Did they get rid of the wrong driver? Should Leclerc have gone instead? Is bringing in Hamilton a mistake and all this stuff? And look, I think Sainz is a good driver, potentially a great driver, certainly a very good driver on his day. But, you know, the numbers don't lie when it comes to his, you know, battles with Leclerc over the last couple of years. And, you know, yes, 2022 was a disaster, but in qualifying and race trim over the last 4 years of them teaming together, Leclerc is winning 100 to 40. Like, it's not especially close. And yes, Sainz will have the occasional mesmerizingly good weekend, like here in Mexico, on it from the get-go really, fast in qualifying, fast in the race. Leclerc couldn't really match him, right? But, you know, to be fair, this is a similar thing that happened on occasion when Hamilton and Bottas were in the same Mercedes. Occasionally, Bottas would come along with a, stunning weekends, and Hamilton couldn't quite match him. But, 75% of the time, Hamilton was ahead. And that's pretty much what we see here. So, I mean, look, I just think it's an interesting narrative that whenever Sainz has a good weekend, because you look at the numbers, like Leclerc, we can even see it on the right-hand side here. Leclerc has pretty much outperformed Sainz for the last 7-8 weekends in a row. And then one great weekend for Sainz, and all of a sudden the narrative is, oh, Sainz so underrated. I'm not like trying to discredit Sainz, because I think he's a very good driver, and I don't think he should be at Williams. I think he should be at Red Bull or Mercedes. But the arguments that Leclerc is actually like overrated or something just doesn't stack up to me. And the other big debate in the, let's say, driver lineup questions over the last few days has been about Oscar Piastri, because after that race he had in Baku, there were lots of people understandably saying, well, is he world championship winning material in the future? And you guys know I've been, critical or at least questioning that statement for Piastri over the last couple of years. I was pretty impressed by him last year, but this season, certainly after round 5 or 6, I was expecting him to kick on, and he did to some degree in the European stint. And of course, the victory in Baku was very impressive indeed. Definitely from a mentality perspective, Piastri clearly has qualities of a world champion driver. Whether he's actually quick enough or is improving at a rate necessary to achieve that in the future, that is still a question as far as I'm concerned. And sure, great overtake on Leclerc in Baku, holds on for the win very impressively, but also was his rear wing a little bit illegal? Probably yes. So there are maybe some caveats in play. And if you look at the championship, Norris is in the ballpark to beat Verstappen this year. It's tough, but it's doable. Piastri is technically, it's still possible, but, after Brazil, that dream is going to be over, no doubt. And that's why there's been a lot of discussion on this in the community over the last few days. Whether you think this is fair or not, it's up to you in the comments below, but I thought it was interesting to mention because Piastri's Mexican Grand Prix was his 42nd start in Formula 1. Norris's 42nd start was midway through 2021 when his McLaren was substantially weaker than the Mercedes and the Red Bull, but yet still Norris at that time was third in the Drivers' Championship ahead of Bottas and ahead of Perez. Now back then, of course, the field spread was greater than today, but still, Norris was very impressive on his 42nd race weekends. Piastri, arguably not so much. And this has been some of the other discussion. And again, whether you agree or not is a question. But I thought it was interesting just to see that, lots of the other top drivers that are considered to be future or they actually are world champion material, you tend to see that pretty quickly, right, in terms of pace, as Loshi mentions here. How close is Piastri really to Norris? There's a debate on that. Obviously, the numbers don't look pretty, and over the last few rounds, Piastri's had a few bad quali performances, and in race trim, I expected Piastri to make more inroads in the race than he did. Max had a 20-second penalty. Piastri really should have finished ahead of Max, but he didn't, and he wasn't actually especially close, especially because Max's car was basically a second off Norris's pace on the final hard run stint. But look, Leclerc in his second year takes down Vettel. Max was winning races pretty much after his first couple of years, fighting the Mercedes on occasion. Norris was getting podiums in cars that maybe didn't deserve it. Russell was, obviously a couple of years in the Williams, but once he was in the Mercedes, really proved his worth. We're not necessarily seeing that from Piastri, right? So it's interesting. It's a matter for debate. Look, regardless, one of those two driver pairings is going to win this year's Constructors' Championship. McLaren are certainly in the driving position still, but Ferrari have eaten into their advantage a lot over the last couple of rounds. I'd also say, in the same way that Lando and Max are friends, were friends, maybe, right? Their relationship is certainly being tested off the track by what is currently happening on the track. That, I at least hope, is what's going to happen again with McLaren and Ferrari, because I am sure that Enzo Ferrari and, Ron Dennis and obviously, from those respective teams, if they saw McLaren bosses or Ferrari drivers photobombing the other team, like, this was a massive rivalry, and it is a rivalry still to this day. One of them's going to win the Constructors, and it will be a rivalry, I imagine, over the next several years to come as well, on the way that Formula 1 currently looks. McLaren versus Ferrari was like the rivalry in Formula 1 for some time. You couldn't be a fan of both. That's not how it worked. And but for some reason today it seems to be like that. Probably because they've not been the front runners for a little bit of time. Now they are. So I hope this changes, is all I'm going to say. I like the lovey-dovey stuff in F1, but I want to see the McLaren versus Ferrari glory days back again when it's absolute chaos on and off the track. Quickly on Mercedes, what a fall from grace they've had over the last few years, but, you know, Red Bull have clearly taken a book out of the leaf out of the Mercedes book over the last season or so. But Mercedes, they won't be bringing any more upgrades because they don't have the money, basically. They've run out of money after the successive upgrades they've brought. They will have, however, both upgrades prepared for Brazil. Whether both drivers go for it is a question. George is going to go back to the new one. Hamilton probably will as well. I think Hamilton was happy enough with the new car, the new upgrades. It's just that Antonelli ran over some debris during the first practice session, right? And they damaged Hamilton's floor that was repaired, but apparently it was repaired to be about 0.2 slower than it would have been otherwise. So yeah, it wasn't ideal for the Mercedes this weekend. They still had decent results regardless. And this is crazy though, right? For the first 10 races of this season, Red Bull won 7, McLaren a single one in, of course, Miami, and Ferrari a couple, Mercedes 0. Since the first 10 rounds, Red Bull have won precisely 0 races. And this is Verstappen's race pace delta to, I think, effectively Norris, or at least to his, you know, closest rival in the championship at the time. The first few rounds, look, we've talked about this graph before on the channel, but it is kind of crazy, isn't it, really, to think about how it went from being a mega Red Bull advantage to basically dead even for several rounds to all of a sudden a McLaren advantage. And even after substantial upgrades to the car in the US Grand Prix, it's not like things have changed dramatically, and McLaren, to their credit, are saying after Mexico, like, hey, we brought upgrades, they worked as intended, we're very happy with it. And Ferrari, who won the race, are sitting there saying, we've got more to come. So, yeah, that's what I'm saying. McLaren versus Ferrari is not stopping as a rivalry in F1 over the coming years, I would imagine. But the big drama, of course, again happened because of Max Verstappen and Lando Norris. And Max knows what he's doing. He actually made it very clear and blunt after the race that, yeah, he's just trying to stop Lando scoring points where he can. And this is the difficulty with overtaking Max, but also with beating Max in general, is that, you know, Max knows that if they collide or something happens to either driver, Max definitely has the advantage given the way the championship is. And as Andreas Stella from McLaren says, Max cost Lando the chance of victory. Even Hamilton, I thought, this is kind of funny. I could see a group of cars ahead and I saw a plume of dust. I knew it was him. I knew it must have been him. I was like, for sure that's him, obviously talking about Verstappen, right? Because, you know, Hamilton knows how it is. Title fight with Max Verstappen. And sure, back in 2021, it was Hamilton and Verstappen trading wins, basically. And now, but, you know, it was the same story then, when obviously Verstappen would fight harder when it was relevant to the championship with Hamilton than he would with other drivers, of course. I mean, that is how championships are won. As I said yesterday, whether that's sportsmanlike is another debate, but, you know, is it effective? I think you can also make the argument that Verstappen is on some level in the wrong era. Like, if Verstappen was a driver in, you know, Senna's era or in Schumacher's era, this type of stuff would be par for the course, and I couldn't imagine what it would be like to have those two. I mean, imagine Verstappen and Schumacher, like, in the same car in the same team. Like, it would be absolute chaos, right? Because Hamilton, in his career, has generally been like, okay, you know, to finish first you have to finish, and he'll be avoiding the instance. And you've got to avoid the instance when you're trying to, you know, chase down a championship lead, obviously. But some drivers just won't do that. We've seen that in the past. But this was the dramatic incident, really. The turn 4 is like, whatever. Nuances of the rules. The turn 8 was like completely outrageous, egregious as far as I'm concerned. It was funny to me because Max said after Austin, when he didn't make the corner, when he pushed Lando off, like, who are you to tell me that I didn't know that I was making the corner? Because people said, oh, Max was never intending to make the corner. You know, he was just trying to force Norris off. And Max is like, what are you talking about? Of course I was trying to make the corner. You know, you're telling me Max was trying to make this corner, sending it down the inside of turn 8 with absolutely no chance of making it. He was so far off the road, of course, by forcing Norris off as well. this is straight up dangerous driving, and Norris said it. I don't think anyone disagrees. I don't really think there's any Verstappen fans out there that will tell you that this wasn't dangerous on some level. Norris had to take evasive action here, or Norris would easily have been in the wall. And I think this is one of the questions on what the stewards should do, because this was a 10-second penalty, as was the turn 4 incident, also a 10-second penalty. But in my opinion, this should probably have been punished more severely, right? So the turn 4 incident, most people who voted in the race fans poll on this said 60% said that it was probably fair, the 10-second for turn 4. Over half said that the turn 7, turn 8 incident, the 10 seconds, was actually too lenient there. And I'm inclined to agree, because this to me was dangerous driving that we've not really seen for some time in the sport. And in my opinion, a sporting infraction, as in you push a guy off the track, you take an advantage, that should be a time penalty. A safety infraction, I think that should be drive-through, stop-and-go penalties. You know, if you do it again, black flag, that type of territory. That's my, opinion, right? Because I think you've got to de-incentivize it. The problem is, and Toto Wolff said this over the weekends, that the FIA have effectively legitimized Verstappen's driving by not punishing this over the last few years. If you want to make it clear that this type of driving is not tolerated, you've got to make it clear to Max that it's not tolerated. And a 10-second penalty probably isn't going to do that. A drive-through, a stop-and-go like we used to do, would do that. And this reminded me, I mean, people talked about Brazil for turn 12 in Austin last time, but, this incident with Norris, that it took me back to Saudi 2021 when the driving standards were like the worst we've basically ever seen, and Max was just running Hamilton off the track, not even trying to make the corner. It was just outrageous what was happening then, and stuff that could be considered dangerous from any driver, I think should be punished with something more severe than a time penalty. But anyway, all the drivers after Austin at the Mexico Grand Prix weekend met with the stewards, and they were discussing what they need to change. So of course we talked about it mainly on the turn 4 and of course the turn 12 at Austin incident before, where it's like, okay, if you're on the outside or the inside, effectively the key point is, if you're defending on the inside line, the guy on the outside, really needs to be given some space at the corner. And if you can push him off and you yourself go off and it's no problem, that's clearly a problem. And 19 out of 20 drivers agreed. Now, it seems like basically every driver agreed. The stewards are on board, the drivers are on board, and Max himself, I don't think it's like Max is against changing the rules. It's more so that he knows that he is the best at taking advantage of them right now, and he maybe still will be in the future. But something clearly has to change. If you're defending the inside line and you go off the track while defending, you shouldn't be entitled to keep that position, no doubt. But most of the drivers wanted the changes now. However, George Russell says, who of course is the head of the Drivers Association, so it makes sense that he's commenting on this, but he said that the stewards wanted to delay these changes until 2025 so that it's consistent for the year. But the drivers, 19 of 20 drivers, said, well, if it's wrong and the regulations are wrong or we need to change them and you're all agreeing in the room we need to change them, let's change it today. And 19 of 20 drivers said, yeah, let's change it today. So the way Russell says this is very interesting, isn't it? Because it absolutely implies that a certain driver was not keen to make the changes today. And of course, we can read between the lines who that might be. It could be someone like Alonso, sure. But I don't know if he'd say this if it wasn't Max, right? Because, Max obviously was somewhat defending his decisions to drive the way he did in Austin. Of course, in Mexico, a lot of it was undefensible, and therefore Max had to say, well, I guess I'd do it again, given the rules are written in the way that they are. But it is interesting, isn't it, that Russell's effectively, throwing somebody under the bus. And it's interesting as well, I would say, that the RB drivers, right, just because you'd think that if Max had a certain opinion, that maybe one of his teammates might share a similar opinion, either Perez or Tsunoda or Lawson, but apparently not. Apparently all of those guys fully in favour of saying, the driving standards in Austin were not good. And of course, we saw further examples in Mexico following, it seems, this conversation. But no one was in agreement with Max. They were like, look, if it's wrong, we've got to change it right about now. And, Max was seemingly not so happy to do that. And yes, Toto says, I think it's a very good steward's decision. And it's clear in going forwards, this dirty driving is no longer allowed. This horrendous punishment with 20 seconds is the right precedent. As I say, I think it could even have been more severe personally. And I think it should be if that type of thing happens again. But it is interesting how for months here, Toto was like, doing everything to get Max on board. And now maybe Toto's happy with his lineup, I don't know, because Russell's done pretty well lately and Antonelli they're confident in, so maybe Toto's like, oh, well, I don't need to appease Max anymore. Intrigued to your thoughts as ever and all of this stuff in the comment section below. Just one final thing to mention, the Brazilian Grand Prix is coming up shortly and the weather is looking interesting. Saturday and especially Sunday, there is currently a pretty reasonable chance of some rain. It could be chaos at Interlagos. It's been chaos there before. The possibility of rain in addition to a brand new track surface and a sprint weekends, it sounds like chaos to me. So could be a big point swing, could be not a point swing at all, could be Verstappen effectively locking up the championship. Who knows? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.